Good morning. This year, Chanukah begins this Thursday at sunset and extends all the way to next week's Friday at sunset. To Gentiles, Chanukah seems like the Jewish Christmas. After all, it's celebrated the same time of year, colorful lights are burning, gifts are given, and there are special holiday foods. But Chanukah celebrates the Jewish people's survival, both physically and spiritually. The word itself means rededication, and it is also called the Festival of Lights. As with all Jewish holidays, the dates can vary because the Hebrew calendar is a lunar calendar. That makes each year short by 11 and a half days. So holidays are earlier by that much for each of 3 years. Then in the fourth year, an additional month of Adar is added to keep holidays in their proper season. So here's the story. After Alexander the Great died, his empire was divided, and in the east, Antiochus Epiphanes sat on Alexander's throne, controlling many lands from Syria. Hellenism, the culture of Greece, was already very popular, and many of the peoples were already adopting Greek ways, including many Jews. Antiochus decided that his empire would be easier to rule if all his subjects followed the same culture: Greek language, Greek customs, and Greek religion. So he outlawed the Torah, and those found with copies of it were executed. Mothers with circumcised baby boys were hanged in public with their babies hanging from their necks. Prescribed worship in the temple was forbidden, but pagan altars were set up across the land. Jews were then required to make public sacrifices and to worship Greek idols. Anyone who disobeyed the emperor's orders was murdered without hesitation. This became a time of mass martyrdom for Jews, and it is said that every bride wore mourning clothes to her wedding because everyone had lost someone dear. The resistance began with Mattatyahu, a devout Jew in the town of Modi'in. He and others were rounded up to prostrate themselves to an idol in the public square. Mattatyahu refused, wresting a sword from a Syrian soldier, then running through the town, crying loudly, "Let everyone who is zealous for the law and who stands by the covenant follow me." Many left their homes and all their possessions then, fleeing with their families to the Judean hills, where David and his followers had hidden from Saul's pursuit. Antiochus' soldiers knew where they had gone, and also knew what laws they followed. They attacked a large gathering of refugees on the Sabbath, but the Jews would not fight, and so they were all killed, down to the smallest infant. Then Mattatyahu's son Judah gathered a fighting force to protect their people and to recover their land, even though the men were farmers and craftsmen, not soldiers. They decided that they must fight on the Sabbath, or there would not remain anyone alive who honored the Sabbath. Vastly outnumbered, the men were clearly afraid when they gathered for their first battle. Many of them had not even eaten that day. But Judah encouraged them, saying, "In the sight of heaven there is no difference between deliverance by many or by few, for victory in war does not depend upon the size of the army, but on strength that comes from heaven. We are fighting for our lives and our laws. He will crush them before us, so do not fear them. Let us raise our people from ruin and fight for them and for our sanctuary." That day they won a decisive victory. In fact, Judah and the army won victory after victory, retaking many towns for the people and for the law of God. The people began to call Judah Maccabee, which means hammer. Eventually, not only Judah, but all the resistors would be called Maccabees. The Maccabees were eventually able to retake the city of Jerusalem. But when they arrived at the temple, they found it in a shambles, and unlawful sacrifices had been made to pagan idols on God's altar. The soldiers tore their clothes and covered their heads with ashes to mourn the defilement of the house of the Lord. They found a few priests still alive to advise them, tore down the defiled altar, then built a new one. They cleaned and purified the entire temple, but when they attempted to rekindle the lampstand, the 5-foot-high menorah which burned before God day and night, and which represented his presence to the people, all they could find was 1 jar of oil, enough to burn for 1 day. They sent out workers to create more pure oil, but they knew that it would be about 8 days before it would be ready. Nevertheless, they lit the menorah, rejoicing in the completion of their rededication of the temple. It burned for 1 day, then another, and another, and another. In fact, that 1 cruse of oil burned for 8 days until new oil was delivered to the Temple Mount. Having lit the menorah in honor of his presence, the Lord showed that he was indeed present with them always, and that his presence did not depend upon the oil. Since then, every 25th of Kislev, Jews remember their trials and their victories, God's help, and their stand for freedom of conscience. A special menorah with 9 branches is lit day by day for 8 days. 8 candles to represent the 8 days when the temple menorah burned miraculously, and 1 is used to light them all. Gifts are given each night, and gelt, or coins, are a common gift, even when they're chocolate. In times of persecutions, Jews invented the dreidel to tell this story secretly to their children. This top has 4 sides, and each side bears a Hebrew letter that begins one of the words in the phrase, Naskadol Hayasham. A great miracle happened there. If anyone unfriendly asked, they could say they were just playing a game. In our day, children play with a slightly different dreidel in Israel, which bears the letters for the phrase Naskadol Hayapo. That is, a great miracle happened here. This information is available on the back table for you to take and includes a recipe for latkes, the potato pancakes of this season, and directions for playing the dreidel game. Kids may take a dreidel from the basket and a bag of chocolate coins. If you want to light candles yourself this year, I have 4 menorahs to lend. Please take 1, along with a box of candles, a large white Shabbat candle, and the directions, which are also on the table. You will also need matches. Bye-bye.